This is the Mixed Martial Arts Beat for the first week of March 2014. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. And last week on the show, we gave you a supersized episode of the MMA Beat. And then just an hour later, some massive news broke. So this week, we're actually going to give you a 10-minute version of the Beat, hoping that nothing breaks by the time we post this. Of course, I'm kidding. We've got a great show planned for all of you. Let's get right into it. Joining us is Mark Raimondi of FoxSports.com, the now bearded Jeff Wagenheim of Sports Illustrated. Yes, of course. And you know him. He is the man with the hat, Chuck Mindenhall of MMA Fighting.com. All right, guys. A lot to talk about. I said it, the big news last week. We missed it by a few hours, but we have to talk about it a week later. The Nevada State Athletic Commission banning testosterone replacement therapy, saying no more TUEs for TRT. The UFC following suit, saying they're not going to give them out when they're the governing body. And now we're seeing the trickle-down effect. Of course, Vitor Belfort pulling out of UFC 173. Let's go to Mr. TRT first. You called it. You said it would be the story of the year, and now you're basking in all that glory. Are you surprised? We were doing this show. We knew that Nevada was going to talk about this. It was on the agenda. Are you surprised, though, that they just banned it like they did last Thursday?
Oh, yeah, of course. They finally figured out the huge effect that this has on people. Look what happened to Luke. As soon as he got off the TRT, look at him. He's just like half the man he used to be. It's unbelievable. But no, I'm surprised just because anybody who's ever seen any governmental bureaucracy at work knows that it just takes hearing after hearing and bringing one guy in and talking about this and talking about it again and rehashing it. So we knew when we were taping last week that the Nevada Commission was having a meeting. But who would ever have thought they were going to do anything at that meeting? It calls into question what was it that pushed them to do that? And I know that you've talked a little bit about Vitor and the surprise drug test and all that, and the result that nobody knows but they know.
Right.
So we can put two and two together and come up with a number that we can't definitively call anybody a cheater, but there's some reason why Nevada did what no governmental agency ever does and acted like that.
That's true. That's true. And listening to them speak and listening to them talk about it and reading the reports afterwards, it almost went in it was like a roller coaster. At first, it didn't look like they were going to ban it, then all of a sudden they banned it. It was very bizarre. And I wonder if a week later, I spoke to Nevada State Athletic Commission. I asked them if they've had any brushback from anyone threatening to sue or do anything, and they said no. And that confirmed to them, at least this is what they told me, that they made the right call. But do you think anyone's going to try to fight this?
No, not really. Ultimately, it took a firebrand like Vitor Belfort. I know that there was an article, we did talk about this a little bit last week. There was an article that came out that sort of worked as a catalyst, sort of maybe at the right time to maybe push them in that direction to clear up things as quickly as they did. But ultimately, no. The only people, there are only a handful of guys that we know of who are doing the TRT, and they're basically falling in because they've been under so much scrutiny. And realistically, Vitor Belfort was the guy who really made it a controversy, I think, because of what he did in 2013. There's so much irony behind what was going on there. He was at he attends an award show for being the Fighter of the Year of 2013. And this is when the random drug test occurs, where all the secrecy begins. That basically makes the whole thing moot. You know what I'm saying? And it's that sort of conflict. Ultimately, though, when you get beyond just Vitor Belfort, I think a lot of the other guys wanted to kind of, they weren't trying to go out there and not that Vitor Belfort was smiting his chest saying look at me, I'm on TRT. He wanted it to go away as well. We just didn't let it go away with him. The other guys have just been so quiet with it. I can't imagine that, and I can't imagine any kind of outrage otherwise. The big consideration is there might be at least one or two guys who really medically do need it, and that's always the thing. To do a straight up ban of it, you exclude a couple guys who may realistically need it, who aren't trying to find a loophole to actually, we're taking it for good reason. But ultimately, no, I don't think there'll be any brushback. Ultimately,
what's interesting? What Chuck was just saying is that Vitor has kind of been the guy that's been the front guy for this TRT, and he's the guy that's getting the most attention. And Dana White always says well, why are you guys singling out Vitor? Because he's getting a title. He's getting a title shot. Do you really want your middleweight champion, being the poster boy for TRT? That's why he's getting all this attention.
And also he has that history where he had that failed drug test in Nevada.
Of course.
But it was amazing because like clockwork, this news comes out about Nevada and then everyone's like, all right, let's see what happens with Vitor. And then just a few hours later on Fox Sports Live, he puts out this statement that he is withdrawing from the event, which is a little bizarre. He wanted this title shot for so long. The next day he goes on Facebook and said, I didn't withdraw. They took me out of the card. Wait a second. And then he says his doctor is telling him he needs 90 days to recover. How bad is Vitor looking right now? Because there's that drug test. And if he did pass the test, why not just tell us I passed and everyone will leave you alone?
And on top of that, he then said, well, after Machida and Weidman fight, I want the winner. Well, if you want to go and fight for the championship and you feel...
He promised the winner, didn't he?
Yeah, he said he was promised.
Right. So if you feel like you are worthy of stepping in there in the cage to fight for the championship of the world without TRT, then why were you doing it in the first place? That's what I don't get.
Right.
If this is something that you really need in your life, and like you said, there are people that probably really need it, well, that's fine. Nobody is saying you should not do TRT. There are a lot of people out in all walks of life who use TRT for the betterment of their lives, but that doesn't mean that you should be able to compete in a combat sport where you can hurt somebody else while using that substance. But with Vitor, he's going to now tell us that, well, I'm going to fight without it and I'm going to win the championship. Well, if you're capable of winning the championship without that stuff.
My thing is, UFC has not really, made comments on what's going on, from their end of things at this point with Vitor Belfort. But you can't. I have to imagine that there's, some hard feelings right now between them and Vitor Belfort. I can't imagine how Vitor Belfort would be trusted in a title situation again. The bottom line is, after something like this happens, now we don't know the full details, but after something like this kind of happens, I don't know how you actually trust him. It's one thing for him to have won the belt, or got the shot, won the belt, and then this thing come out, how do we deal with this? But I don't even know why they would want to put him in a position or put themselves in a position where you would trust, him to be, it's just like we were talking about, I know I was talking to you about this at one point, John Lineker or a guy like that who may not make weight. Well, it's hard to have a guy like that.
Well, how about the Cyborg situation? Dana keeps saying that we can't put her in there because she said she'll die. These guys, some of them, Vitor is saying, I have a health deficiency. How in good conscience can you put him in a title fight knowing that he has said this?
Well, he should win a fight off TRT. He should take a fight, before he gets a title shot, beat like a Jacare or, fight someone like that before they ever give him a title shot. Because like you said, Dana White's talking about, Cyborg's got to fight at 135. She has to fight and prove she's clean before she comes and fights Ronda Rousey. So why not the same thing for Vitor Belfort? Why not that same, standard?
I wonder if he will agree to those terms. He's saying, I've been promised a title shot. The other interesting thing to note is...
He says a lot of things.
Of course.
He says a lot of
At this
things.
point, does he even fight in the UFC again? That's what I'm saying.
It's a very good question. And when he applies for a new license, let's say he fights again later on this year, maybe he takes the rest of the year off. The timing of when he'll reapply to fight again and what a commission says to him, because at this point, given his age, most commissions will have to, make sure that he's okay, healthy, over 35 and whatnot.
Right.
They're going to ask him the results of that test. They're going to want to know what happened.
Right.
He's going to have to answer these questions at some point. And at this point, if he, in my opinion, I always feel like if you failed the test, look at what guys like Andy Pettit did. You cheated.
Right.
You come out clean, people are a lot nicer to you. But if you try to...
Especially him, I think, because he's always put up such a strange, contradictory front on a lot of levels. For him to come clean like that, I think would actually endear him to people who really want to root for him. I think it would sort of be a good thing for him to just do it that way, rather than to continue sort of the path he's going down right now.
He's like the A-Rod of MMA. He's flip-flopping. He's like going back and forth. He's saying he needs it, he's saying he doesn't, and he's like the A-Rod. He's the guy that's getting vilified. He's the guy being singled out. Just like A-Rod is.
And
Other guys are doing stuff, but he's the guy that's in the spotlight.
We've been in these scrums, Dana White has continuously been to bat for him, just saying, like, why are we always picking on Vitor Belfort? It's just the whole situation is pretty ugly at this point. But Vitor actually looks, worse than anybody in this situation, worse than UFC or anything. I don't know if it's the timing and all that, who's the real catalyst, but ultimately he looks really bad in this.
Well, I don't know why we're talking about this, because his lawyer said this is irrelevant.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not irrelevant.
It's every step of the way, it seems like they're making a mistake. Also interesting to note that Nevada isn't the leader on this front. California State Athletic Commission essentially banned TRT back in June of last year. New Jersey has made it essentially impossible to get a TUE for TRT. So Nevada's a little late to the game, but of course they are the leader and they'll get that kind of recognition, and the UFC is going to follow them. But we'll go back to Mr. TRT. And I'll ask you, I think, the question that I asked you last week.
Right.
Now that Nevada has done this time next year, all 50 states, all governing bodies, are they banning this stuff?
I have no idea if that's going to happen.
What do you think? Do you think Nevada will lead to that
Well,
trickle-down effect?
I think any time that Nevada makes any kind of ruling, most commissions follow it. So whether they formally go out and state they're banning it or not, I think it's going to be really impossible for anybody in the U.S. to get a TRT exemption before an MMA fight. So whether they ban it, I think it's somewhat semantics. I don't know whether we'll see them come out and say it's impossible, but it is going to be essentially impossible. Just like in New Jersey, they said we're not banning it, but you're not going to get a TRT exemption. Imagine, the UFC trying to have a Vitor Belfort fight in Atlantic City. It's not going to happen.
Ultimately, I think probably most will follow suit because it's easier now. It's harder to justify why you would keep it now than it is just follow suit. You know what I'm saying? Because after that scrutiny sort of falls on it and it's addressed finally by Nevada, it's sort of like, why do we want that scrutiny ourselves, or why do we need it? And that way, and then, so once it's accepted also in one place, it becomes more acceptable in others.
I'm also interested to note or to see what happens. Like, is this the tip of the iceberg? In the sense that a lot of people are, rejoicing that this is the end of drugs in MMA, and it's really not, right? I mean, random drug testing, doing more stringent drug testing, all that stuff is really what needs to be done. This is just one small thing. I mean, who knows? 15 guys could be using TRT, some applying, some not. I'm sure many guys are doing other things. Yeah,
TRT is like a facade almost. It's the thing that's getting the attention. Now that it's gone, people are saying, oh, this is a big deal, and it's like, the big step, toward like the anti-drug movement. But, we don't know what other guys are doing. And technically, you can still use testosterone if you keep it a normal level. You don't need an exemption to kind of do it. And if they're not testing,
ratio tests come in, find out, is there synthetic testosterone in your system or not?
But there's a difference, though. This is something that ended the legitimized, quote unquote, legitimized cheating. You can you can use human growth hormone, all these different things.
I do, actually.
Oh, I know you do, but I was speaking of you. You can use all these things, but you have to do them, in the darkness of an alleyway or something. You have to do them in the shadows, and so you're clearly cheating. TRT exemptions it was an athletic commission essentially saying it's okay to use a PED, and that makes it really significant. So yeah, of course we're not going to end drugs in mixed martial arts or any sport, but we're pushing it off into the shadows and saying there's no more endorsement of this.
Final thing on this topic, Chuck, if I may, Weidman, Belfort goes to Weidman, Machida. How big of a drop-off as far as interest level is that for you?
It is. I don't know. I don't know if I would go so far as to say it's a drop off. It's just it changes something. There's like a pecking order. There's sort of like that meritocracy thing that we always talk about. Like that sort of gets out of whack a little bit. But at the same time, Machida has looked pretty good at 185. He was probably going to be next in line anyway. So it's just the next man up. In some ways, given the situation, again, it makes Vitor Belfort look bad, and the fight itself is still compelling. I mean, anytime Machida's in there, you're not sure. He's sort of an enigma how he's going to present himself. He gives you a lot of different looks. He's very hard to deal with. And then you look at the stylistic matchup with Weidman, who's very strong and very able to dictate how he wants the fight to go. It becomes a very interesting matchup. It's a little bit different. There was half the theater about what was going to go on with Vitor Belfort was how he was, what's going to happen beforehand. Is he going to be able to do this? And then, will he look the same as he did in Nevada as he did in Brazil over the last year? I mean, those things kind of go away a little bit, which is, I wanted to personally see it. You wanted to see how Vitor Belfort would do in that situation, I guess.
Machida might be a harder fight.
Yeah, that's true too.
Might be a harder fight.
Once the referee waves the two guys together, I think the fights are pretty equal, or at least or comparable. It was all the stuff you're talking about, all that pre-fight stuff that was going to be really. That's the story. They're not going to get that with Machida. He's going to test clean. He's going to come in there. He's going to make way. All the things.
Such a square, man.
Yeah, exactly. What a martial artist, guys. Let's move along. On Friday, Joe Rogan was on a Los Angeles radio show.
Kevin and Bean.
That's right. K-Rock, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyhow, he had said that there was some massive news coming regarding women's MMA, some news that is going to blow everyone's mind. It's wild, it's amazing, it's great. And he had hinted that the news would break this week. UFC President Dana White tells me nothing's coming this week, but never denied that there was something in the works, and never denied when I asked him about the possibility of Gina Carano, of all people, who hasn't fought in 4.5 years, fighting Ronda Rousey later on this year. So let's zero in on Carano versus Rousey. Do you buy this? Are you interested in this fight?
No. Why?
Really?
No, she's not. I mean, she's not a contender. I mean, this is a title fight. Mm-hmm. I saw on Twitter this week people were comparing it to like, a James Toney situation, or even like an Anderson Silva going up to fight Forrest Griffin. It could not be any further from those things, because this is a woman who hasn't fought in almost 5 years, like you said. you know, she's not a contender for a title. Those weren't title fights. You know, James Toney wasn't coming in to fight someone for the light heavyweight title or the heavyweight title. You know, now she's gonna come in and fight Ronda for the title. I just don't. I'm not buying it. I mean, people are going to buy it because they're both names and it'll have casual interest. But this is like, I mean, it's kind of a freak show fight. It kind of is.
I know Jeff's all about this. Right?
I consider it an insult to MMA fans. I really do. You know, there are some people who will buy it. You know, as Mark says, because there are some people that have seen her movies, and maybe some people remember back when she was fighting all those many years ago. But I think for the fans who love to, buy the pay-per-views and see the title fights, this is an insult. It really is. And I understand from a marketing perspective. Maybe, Ronda Rousey hasn't been selling as many pay-per-views as they would like, and maybe they think that this would generate some more interest. But at what cost? And also, I'm not convinced that was what Joe Rogan was talking about. He's an MMA nerd who loves all the little intricacies of MMA. So for him, an awesome fight. I just can't imagine him thinking of like a kind of like this celebrity versus celebrity thing as being an awesome fight. I think that he might be, thinking that, Holly Holm's going to come in, and so that would be a little more like the James Toney thing, a boxer who's going to come in and try to take on the
Cyborg,
grappler,
perhaps?
Or maybe even Cyborg. Although, who knows? I mean, I think that it's pretty clear that Cyborg needs to make weight and pass drug tests before she gets at Rousey. So I don't know which one of those things, but I'd be really disappointed if this is the fight that gets made.
Wasn't Dana White now following Gina on Twitter? I mean, this is like
that
something.
Says it all right.
Yeah, I think it's going down.
It's a done deal.
One thing about it is, you look at just the merit of it. Obviously, is going to be completely out of whack for somebody who hasn't fought in almost 5 years and lost the last fight that she appeared in, and lost to the person that most people are clamoring for in what would be like considered the big fight, right? My big concern is she's only fought 8 times. I think she only fought at 135 once. Realistically,
2006, I think it was. Yeah.
And I mean that was the only time. The other times it was catchweights or she was overweight.
She had a hard time making.
And she had a hard time making it. If we're worried about Cyborg Santos making weight, we have an equal concern, if not more of a concern, for Gina Carano making that weight to fight at 135. So to me, there are other factors than just does she deserve it, which we know she doesn't, things like that. I mean, there's logistical things like can she even make that weight?
She might die, Chuck.
Yeah, she might die.
She hasn't said that, but you have those other issues with the likes of Kat Zingano, who has been promised a shot. What if she is ready to go after her long road back? Alexis Davis has looked good. What if she's ready to go? You have those issues as well, but I hate to tell you guys, I'm eating it up. I'm buying this because I think that there's an interesting story there between the sort of original face of women's MMA passing the torch to the new face, and right now, let's just say the UFC is entertaining this idea because they haven't outright said they are. Let's just say they are. They need names like Gina Carano. They do. Almost 50 fights this year. They need big names. Gina Carano is still, in my opinion, a big name. Just look at the attention this rumor has generated. And I think that you can build something up there. Now, the issues that you mentioned about the weight and whether or not it's justifiable, they're all very valid. But we've seen this before. Let's not pretend we haven't seen fights like this before. And I think this is a fight that's worth making.
And you have a real fighter out there. You have Cyborg out there. She's a real fighter. She's fought. She has the same weight issues that Gina Carano
might
have.
fall into the Ben Askren territory right now, where she might deserve it, but due to other issues, she's not getting her shot. Because Ben Askren deserves to be there,
of course,
as well.
You want a big name? Floyd Mayweather. Rousey said said she could beat him.
And then came Velasquez too, I think.
Well, that one I don't think she would have a chance. But Floyd, come on, why not?
If promoted correctly, Carano. That's right. Now that one I'm all about. If promoted correctly, Carano, Rousey, can it do 1 million buys?
Maybe.
Or then how about this? Which is the bigger fight, Carano Rousey or Rousey Cyborg? Which fight do you think?
They're both big fights for different reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, if they really did book Carano. We could sit here and talk about the issues we have with it, but honestly, the lead up to the fight it becomes something big. The whole thing is its own big theater, right?
The return.
I happen to think that after the weigh-ins, all the drama goes away because I don't think it's competitive at this point. That's the only thing I would have a problem with it. But that doesn't mean that the people, all the fringe people that they're trying to bring in and have a big event would not tune in for a fight like that. I'm sure that they would.
There's no doubt that Carano's a bigger name than Cyborg, only because she's been in movies and whatnot and fought on CBS more and all that. But do you think if promoted correctly, the Cyborg fight would be bigger only because there's legitimate heat there? The Rousey-Carano fight, they're going to be very cordial. There's a lot of respect there. They like each other. But I think people would get behind the Cyborg fight. I think at the end of the day, maybe the Cyborg fight, even though she's not as popular, the same way the Carano-Cyborg fight was very popular because of the, beauty versus brawn angle that they were selling on Showtime, I think the heat between Rousey and Cyborg would lead to more buys. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think the Cyborg-Rousey fight would be a bigger fight in terms of buys. I don't think it won't be a huge difference because, like you said, Carano has all that casual interest, but the Cyborg fight has all this juice, and there's the Dana White angle with him saying all this bad stuff about Cyborg, them going at it on Twitter and that whole thing, and we know from experience that drama does sell fights. Rampage Rashad and Rampage John Jones, and rivalries do sell fights. Silva Sonnen. So I think that will end up being a bigger fight, but it's just a better fight. Can we just get Cyborg in the UFC? Can that just happen?
It'd be hypocritical to not understand why the UFC would put together Carano. Honestly, they do need events. We've talked about this before. Where what happened to the events? There's now they're running so many cards that the event aspect sort of goes away.
Sure.
Well, either one of those fights is an event, and it would be an event more than it would be with Kat Zingano at this point in time, more than it would be with Alexis Davis at this point in time. So I think that from the UFC's perspective, sometimes you need to just find an event. You need to pin some things around an event.
I've been dying to ask you guys this question, you two in particular, since last week, 'cause I know you were there in person. You were in Connecticut on Friday for Bellator. And Jeff in particular, let's ask you first.
Mr.
Rampage
TRT.
Jackson, King Mo, they're in the cage at the same time,
Right.
and there's a scuffle, and a lot of people, at least at home, are calling shenanigans, especially by the way it was presented by Bellator.
Right.
We gotta go, there's a crazy melee. It was very, for the wrestling fans out there, WCW-esque. What did you think of it in
Where was
person?
Gus Johnson?
Yeah, I didn't catch every bit of it because I actually had to hold him back.
Oh, wow, he was all about
He
it.
was climbing over the cage.
I was so scared.
And I had to,
You
like, I said,
a few monsters that night.
I pulled him off the cage. He was going after one of them. I don't even know which one. But, here's the thing. Rampage was pretty amped up. There's no, I don't think there was any acting in his reaction after his fight because he was pretty pissed off that, his opponent was saying, I'm going to retire you. And he got amped up and he got in his face and so he was pretty amped up, and then he turns and says, "And you're next." And I suppose that that Lawal's reaction was somebody says that to you, they're gonna react. But it was one of these kind of like I'm gonna get you, hold me back, hold me back, hold me back. They were not really trying to go after each other. They were trying to go after each other. We would have seen a scuffle, but it was kind of a hold me back.
Did it turn you off though? Did it make you less interested in the fight, or were you okay with it?
Not too much because they seemed to have they had seemed to have quieted whatever beef they had, when they first both went to Bellator. And this reignited that a little bit. And I think there is some realness to it underneath the surface. But yeah, these guys they staged a pro wrestling kind of thing. It was even better at the post-fight press conference. I mean, you were there. It was like an Abbott and Costello routine. It really was. They were like, it was one-liners.
It was actually more
going back.
comical, right? It was actually like they were on the same team at the press conference. They were throwing one-liners at each other.
It was totally comical. It was great.
It's an insult to Abbott and Costello, Jeff.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's true. It was, yeah.
I know you were at the press conference, Chuck. Did you notice, watching the stream, I thought it was very interesting how Bjorn was always talking to Rampage, cracking jokes with Rampage, never really talking to King Mo. And King Mo was saying, King Mo I think was really fired up, busted lip. He was very bothered. He was bothered by the booze. Yeah. And I thought it was very telling about who the new kid in town was, because just, maybe a year and a half or so ago, they were all about King Mo.
Right.
Not so much these days. And I thought his body language was very telling.
Well, ultimately, I think King Mo, and I'd seen him just before he went up and took a seat up there on the days. He was talking just casually off to the side, and he was pretty seething at the whole situation. I don't know exactly what. He was upset with the booze. He's probably upset a little bit with his performance. And he was definitely upset with Quentin Jackson. So wherever it was rigged, I think it was more rigged, if it was rigged at all, it was coming from the theater man himself, which was Quentin Jackson more so than Muhammed Lawal. I think that he's genuinely responding. Now maybe he's formulated some of how this might play out in his head, but he was pretty emotional before he got up there, before the cameras were rolling on him that night. So it's an interesting thing. But I will say that there was a very uncomfortable feeling in that room because it wasn't uncomfortable like, oh, we may be about to watch a fight, but more in the line where you're teetering on, what are we doing here? Where is this? How real is this? What's going on? and it was sort of comical too. It was like comical. You're looking at Bjorn Rebney sort of in the middle, doesn't know how to react in it.
He was smiling.
He was smiling.
He was smiling to the whole thing. He was,
and they let it go pretty far because they're, is the ring still up? Let's go do this right now. Let's take off our coats. They're going through the whole act. It got a little weird there, but at the same time, Bellator was very efficient about taking down the cage. Fortunately, it already kind of started to move that out of there. But
the ring girls were still there.
The ring girls were still there.
The
ring announcer was in there.
That's right.
But it's just bizarre, but in some ways it's the fun bizarre where you're sort of, who cares? It's this, who cares where the chaos stems from? It's just all sort of fun in the end. Like you look at it and you're like, what a strange circumstance that whole was.
And finally, Bellator gets the fight that they wanted.
Yeah,
and we had talked about that a little bit earlier. We were about how so many times they make these plans for these tournaments of who's going to meet whom, and it never doesn't work out that way. But finally, they figured it out. They just have 4 men in the tournament. Only one thing could go wrong, and nothing went wrong. They got their 2 guys, and now they're going to get to
nothing
go.
So far until Quentin pulls out of the fight for some reason. But
are you interested in this fight?
I mean,
given where they are right now in their careers, what King Mo has done as of late, what Rampage has done.
I mean, the shenanigans the other night did not make me any more interested in it.
Did it turn you off?
It didn't turn me off, but it was complete BS. I mean, it was all acted, poorly acted, might I add. I do think it's an interesting fight because both guys have great personalities, and they do kind of like bring in fan interest, and they're kind of charismatic guys. So people are interested in what they do. Do I think it's a relevant fight in the 205-pound division in 2014? No, but I think it's going to serve the purpose for what Bellator needs. It's probably going to be going to pay-per-view, I'd imagine.
I think it's a layup that's going to be the co-main event.
Yeah.
Eddie Alvarez.
It's in Memphis,
They need Rampage on that card. I mean, they need that name. That name. They need that drawing power.
And the ratings did well, over 1 million viewers on Spike TV. But what about the decision to go back to pay-per-view? This time they get it right with the right main event.
Right.
It's the trilogy fight. But again, the second time they fought, over 1 million views. And now you're going to pay-per-view where it's virtually impossible to get over 100,000 buys. In the old MMA world, when the UFC wasn't running 50 events a year, if you're not the UFC, it's almost impossible, like I said, to get over 100,000. So is this the right call? Why are they doing this?
Well, we've had this discussion many times before about whether Bellator should be in the pay-per-view business, and it's water under the bridge. They want to be in the pay-per-view business, and at least they're doing it the right way. They're putting together the best fight that Bellator possibly could put together, and those are the guys that are in the main event. They're not doing what they did last time, trying to sell us Tito and Rampage as the main event, and then this other stuff underneath it. So they've got the right fight. Look, it's hard for us because we work in the industry. We watch all these fights, but I'm trying to imagine myself, just as a fan who's gonna drop, whatever amount of money it is for this fight card. I would do it. I think I would like to see Chandler Alvarez. I want to see those guys fight. So, why not? I think it's a really good fight, and if you can get King Mo and Rampage in the secondary fight.
That's the right co-main event for them at this point. So it makes sense on those levels. And if they had gotten Gilbert Melendez, say, if they had put him in there against Will Brooks or whoever, it wouldn't have mattered. To me, you would have had like an actual pretty good-looking card.
Absolutely.
And especially with Gilbert Melendez, now we're used to paying money for Gilbert Melendez. At this, well, I don't know if we're used to because he fought it, but you know what I'm saying. He's with the UFC where we expect pay-per-view. So I don't know. My thing is, it's sort of also, it comes down to the price point for me a little bit. Like if they're charging $49 like the UFC or whatever that is, $55. To me, that's too much to ask for them to do that because they just haven't established themselves as a pay-per-view entity. UFC has been that forever. We just expect to pay that money on their pay-per-views, even on cards like this last one, UFC 170. Where we were, you had to sort of stretch your imagination a little bit to see all of those fights being competitive, other than the one right in the middle between Damian Maia and Rory McDonald. So it's like, it's one of those situations where you have good competitive fights. They should be. We don't know what's going to happen in Champ. That's the greatest. I think that's probably the best lightweight fight that's out there right now, other than maybe Gilbert Melendez and Anthony Pettis. We don't know how it's going to go down. It's a trilogy fight. It's a big deal. You could see how you'd want to try, if you're ever going to try a pay-per-view model, this would be it. But I would definitely try to keep the price point somewhere where it's still respectable. You're respecting the event, but it's less than the UFC's, just to give it some. I don't know if that would help, but just given the climate, how many cards there are, how many pay-per-view, etc., that would probably be their best tack.
Also worth noting that they might have to do pay-per-view given their deal with Eddie Alvarez. Re-signing for 2 fights. The last one was supposed to be on pay-per-view. It wasn't. They might just have to do it, and they might have been just forced into this.
They're gonna have to push hard to get a decent number for. I don't even know if they'll do a decent number, but I mean, names sell pay-per-views. That's what it comes down to. They have Rampage in the co-main event, but do the casual fans who are gonna plunk down money, do they know Mike Chandler? Do they know Eddie Alvarez? Obviously, the first 2 fights were amazing. They were 2 of the best fights in Bellator history. But is there that name? Is that connection there? Are people going to see a poster and say, "Oh, I'm going to buy that fight to watch Michael Chandler"? I don't know if that really exists.
I wonder though, just being Bellator or anybody really, if you're an MMA and you're trying to do a pay-per-view event, who's going to come over? Like, who would be the guy that would be, outside of the UFC? Would it be a guy who just could not figure out the UFC, butted heads with Dana White, but he was a legitimate star like Gilbert? Gilbert Melendez is not even a great example, but let's say John Jones went over to Bellator suddenly. Would we then be saying, like, that's an automatic pay-per-view event? I mean, sometimes you're like, is it just because it's Bellator and they have no precedent, they have not done pay-per-view, and it's hard to break into that market? Sometimes I don't know how much the name, that you want the best names on there, but I'm not sure how much the best names push people into buying it.
The brand used to help a lot back in the day for the UFC. I used to think that the UFC brand alone would equal 250 or so thousand buys, but these days things have changed. And also worth noting that in May, at least what we know right now, the UFC has a show scheduled for May 10th in Cincinnati. They have a show scheduled for May 24th, and then 2 scheduled for May 31st. They're talking about May 17th. There are 4 UFC cards that month. You're trying to squeeze in and not only get people to watch, getting people to buy the show.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to take some promotional.
Malpractice?
No.
The person in that chair has to say. No, it's going to take a little bit of. They're going to have to get some muscle behind this. But you know what? The main event of this card, the culmination of a trilogy. This could. They could legitimately argue that this could be the best trilogy in the sport's history. I don't know whether it is or isn't.
They're billing it as that, I believe.
If this fight lives up to the other first 2, I would have a hard time finding one that's better. So if they can really sell that, they can generate. They've got a lot of footage from those first 2 fights, and they show that. They might generate some interest.
I hate the fact that this pay-per-view discussion even has to hang over that fight, because it's just such a great fight, and the first 2 were spectacular. Guys, let's move along. This weekend, it is the return to the UFC once again. There was a show on Fight Pass last weekend in Macau. They're on Fight Pass this weekend. In my opinion, I'm joking about this, it's the greatest card in the history of Fight Pass. It really is, although the whole thing is just 2 months old. But this is a great main card. Every fight on the main card, 4 fights on the main card, are very intriguing. The return of Gunnar Nelson, Brad Pickett making his flyweight debut, 2 former teammates, Melvin Guillard and Michael Johnson fighting, who've looked good as of late. That's true. And Alexander Gustafsson coming off the fight of the year, fighting Jimmy Manuwa in London, his hometown. So to me, I'm wondering, start with you, Mark, here, was this a brilliant move by the UFC to put this card on Fight Pass? Are you forcing people to now finally sign up for this thing? Or was this a big mistake to put Gustafsson, who is 1 win away from fighting for the belt if he wins, 1 fight removed from one of the greatest fights of all time, and putting him on Fight Pass? He doesn't even sound all that happy about it.
Yeah, there's 2 ways of looking at it. I mean, you could say that, for one, the diehard fans might, drop the $10 a month for Fight Pass to watch this fight, because it is a great main card, and you have the guys coming up the fight of the year against John Jones, and you have the Brad Picketts, and you have Gunnar Nelson. The other side is that if you're gonna build a title fight with Gustafsson next, if he beats Manuwa, he's fighting in almost relative obscurity in this fight. How are you gonna build off that? One of the things about guys getting a title fight is that you want to have them hot. You want to have them in front of as many eyes as possible. The previous fight. Be great if he got to, finishes his opponent and he, wins by knockout. But if no one sees it, how are they going to build that? Well, Gustafsson, beat this guy in front of, 50,000 people on Fight Pass, last time out. So how do you build that guy as your next main event?
Well, was the John Jones fight maybe big enough to where you get, the sort of free pass, if you will?
Well, in a sense, it's a free pass, not just for the fans. It's in a way for Gustafsson, and not that any fight that the UFC puts on is a tune-up, but this is about as close to that that we've seen since Daniel Cormier fought.
But this is one they essentially booked from the get-go. Although Little Nog was the original opponent.
Right, but this was one they booked.
I don't think Jimmy Manuwa was working at Starbucks last week. I'm pretty sure that didn't
maybe
happen.
next week.
Yeah.
But no, it's a fight that Gustafsson is somewhat set up to win, and so. In a way, getting him ready for his next challenge with Jones, I don't see a problem with that. This is what they. It's almost like they're rewarding him. As far as the alternative, well, if they put him into a pay-per-view, you're going to spend, what, $55 to buy that. Well, that's almost a half a year's worth of Fight Pass. So in a sense, if you're that diehard fan who buys all the pay-per-views, well, instead you're spending, $10 a month and you're getting a half a year. So if the UFC does this like 3 times and puts 3 really legitimate, top contender fights on Fight Pass, then it ends up becoming a value for the fans. I mean, here I'm sounding like I'm selling stuff for the UFC, but I'm just trying to like wrap my brain around what they're thinking economics wise. I do think that it's not going to draw obviously the kind of attention that it would draw if it were a Fox card. There's no, that's obvious. But this is what the UFC is trying to do. They want to have a new platform, and they have to find some things that are going to entice you to buy it. One is to put a top contender on there. They're also doing the whole series in Brazil with Chael Sonnen and Wanderlei Silva. So they're doing things to try to say, if you want to watch us, you got to get this.
I think it's perfect in some ways because basically they're spelling out their intentions of what the Fight Pass will be, which is a lot of these European cards. You have 2 Europeans. One of the guys being Gustafsson. That's really where the whole thing comes in. Is like, oh, Gustafsson, the mishandling of Gustafsson in this situation. But ultimately, the first time you're really going to appear behind the paywall, don't you want somebody of that caliber or somebody of that intrigue to be that guy? Because honestly, like if you're on the fence of should I spend it's only $9.99. That's how you want people to be like it's only $9.99 or whatever the price is. You want it to be more like that. Of course, you want to see it. So the whole card, that card to me, it won't always be of this caliber. That's what I know. They're not going to be able to put together the kind of fights that they have for this one. But it's sort of perfect for them to give you a basic idea of what you're getting when you get this thing. And it's because it's going to be so European centric and overseas overseas types of cards for the Fight Pass. You're also getting a glimpse of what they're trying to do with that.
And we knew going into this year that the schedule was expanding, 49 or so events. And we knew that was in large part due to Fight Pass. What we didn't know was how they would lay it out over the entire calendar year. But on Thursday, they announced that they're going to have a show May 31st in Berlin. We already knew that there was going to be a show headlined by Chael Sonnen versus Wanderlei Silva in Brazil. So finally, after years of talking about this, they're going to do 2 UFC shows on the same day. They're also doing this later in October and probably another couple times this year to fit in all those events. And initially, I was like, wow, 2 events on the same day, that's 5 hours each, let's just say 10 hours combined of UFC action. But then I thought, well, isn't that kind of better than doing it, a Friday show and a Saturday show? At least ruin one day, you know what I'm saying, with all your stuff, as opposed to having a show every single day of the weekend. What do you think? 2 shows on one day, how will people respond to this?
It's a lot of MMA. Yeah. It's like all going to run together. Like you're not going to know who fought on what card. You're not going to have any idea what the prelims were, and it's just going to be a mess. But the important thing to remember about these Fight Pass cards when they're in other countries is they're not for us. They're not for the United States. They're
gravy
just not. They're for, if that card on May 31st in Germany is for the German fans. It's going to be on prime time in Germany. It's going to be on probably middle of the afternoon here, kind of like Saturday's card from London.
Yeah, the shows won't coincide.
They won't coincide. Right. They'll be back to back. So it's not for us. So I mean, they're not doing this saying we're going to give United States fans even more fights. It's more like we need to throw Germany a bone and have an event there.
What do you think, Jeff? How do you think people will respond to this, or do you think, like Mark said, essentially what we've been saying on the show for a while? The Fight Pass shows are gravy. No sense in complaining about something that you don't really have to buy if you don't want.
Right. You would not be seeing it otherwise. So, right. And I suspect that there may be a little bit more cherry picking. Some people will sit there and watch the entire 5 hours of an event. Other people say, well, I'm not going to watch those prelim. Maybe there's one prelim that I want to watch, and I'll watch that one, but the rest of it, I'm just going to watch the main card.
That's a dangerous, slippery slope, though, right? Now we've gone from the point that you had to watch everything to picking and choosing. That could be a problem.
Sure, but we also are in the age of the DVR, or in the case of Fight Pass, like the last week's Macau fights. I had been at Bellator the night before, got home ridiculously late. I wanted to sleep a little bit.
You didn't wake up at 6 a.m. to watch
I did not. Actually, I watched them
with Rampage.
Me and Rampage were partying down. We were dancing. And so I got home and I got a little sleep, and then I got up and watched it a little bit delayed. It requires a little bit of not watching social media and all that kind of stuff. But you've got a DVR, you've got Fight Pass. You can sort of tailor things around what you like. So this is this is the wave of the future.
Is this dangerous though for the UFC?
I think so, because the bottom line is, I don't know who's going to be on that Germany card, but I'm guessing they're going to do sort of like what the Strikeforce old model was and what Bellator does a lot of times, which is fill up their prelims and probably even some of the undercard with local fighters that we have never heard of. And you don't know, I'm guessing the UFC really gauges them enough to know that they are caliber to fight. But how good can they actually be? You start to get into some situations where you have a lot of guys who are going to be fighting in the UFC who our description of what UFC caliber is may take a nosedive this year, and I've been really worried about
it
this.
Has already
anyway,
changed.
yeah, I've been worried about
China.
This. Yeah,
can you name him? No, right? I can't.
Crickets. No. Crickets. I think it was
On the
crickets.
side, Zipeng something.
So
I got nothing.
There's a little bit of there is worry about that because this is a league you cover and you want to cover it as a professional league, and that's the way we've established it. When they go into these deep waters like this, it remains to be seen how much of that caliber stays up there, how much of it falls off, how much inundation there is. All those things remain to be seen. 2014 may be a grand experiment realistically for the UFC, and by 2015 we could be in a completely different model again of how they want to present their fights.
The UFC is almost acting as their own development league instead of having minor leagues.
Right.
They're actually developing overseas guys under the UFC brand on the prelims of these, and even on the main cards in some cases of these international shows.
Yeah, and also, for both media and fans, a lot of it comes down to what your perspective is on this whole thing. When I'm writing stuff for Sports Illustrated, they don't ask me to write about every single prelim on the card. Usually I write about the main event, maybe the co-main, and if something really interesting happened down below, I do that. For folks who are like MMA Fighting and other places where you really have to be on top of all the fights, that's gonna it's gonna be a bigger job. People have to cover two full. Yes, but Chuck's gonna be working for 10 hours that day. And I think the fans have the same. It's the same thing for fans. There are some people who are completists. They want to watch everything, and then other people are gonna just cherry pick. Well, I want to see the main event of that one, and I want to see this one or that one, and they'll pick and choose what they want to see. So maybe there's a danger in it, but I've never been one of those people that said, well, too much is too much. I'm happy to. Sometimes
There's no off season in the sport, and that's the other thing. When you have off season, you can always take a step back. If you're a fanatical football fan, you can always step back and sort of have this time to regroup, and then you get excited again.
Absolutely.
We never rewind. We never get. It's not like we ever can reinvent our enthusiasm as time goes away. I mean, and now it's like every single week there's this many cards going on. It's just. To me, it's just weariness because you're not sure of how it's all going to play out.
Great point. You also remind me of a bit of a pet peeve of mine. If you're, and we're talking about the beat, right? If you're a baseball beat writer and you're covering the Royals and they suck, your job is to still cover every game and do your job. And it always kind of bugs me when journalists complain or even threaten to not cover a card because they think it's not up to their standards. Right. You cover the beat. You got to be there, and this is what they're throwing at us, and we have to cover it. Mm-hmm. That's my take.
You really wanted to say Knicks instead of Royals.
No, I did. I thought about it, but I didn't have the heart to do that. But thanks for reminding me. All right, that does it for us. Let us know what you thought about anything we talked about on today's show, and of course, we will be back next week for another new episode of the MMA Beat. Hopefully, nothing breaks by the time. We
10 minutes
this.
from now.
Yeah,
10 minutes from now.
Something's going to happen, and this is going to be all useless. But hopefully that doesn't happen by the time you watch this. For Mark, Jeff, Chuck, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the MMA Beat right here on MMAfighting.com.